Hello, my name is Matt Pinkerton. I'm a principal scientist at NIWA in Wellington, and my kind of background is in remote sensing of water environments. So I came over to New Zealand about 20 years ago, and I've been working at NIWA since then. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing on the remote sensing over the ocean. So there's a lot of satellites that are available over the ocean. These are, these satellites here are generally the ones that are operated by NASA or NOAA. We have a focus on the ocean color ones in particular of these, but I'm just making the point that there's a lot of other satellites looking at things like sea surface height, looking at salinity, and also looking at the aerosols which are interacting with the ocean surface. So the ones that I've highlighted here are really the remote sensing of ocean color. So we're looking at visible band radiation coming off the surface of the water. And really there's two main types of ocean color satellite. There's the ones which also have got a lot of applications over the land that we've heard a lot of so far. So the sort of true color images. Some of these have kind of very broad spectral bands. 20 or 30 nanometers. Some of them are getting more down to the hyperspectral sense. And they tend to have a very high spatial resolution, but the radiometric accuracy of those is a lot lower because of issues with atmospheric correction. I tend to focus on the ocean color type of satellites, which are more optimized for measuring water-leaving radiance. And so they tend to have something like 7 to 10 spectral bands, narrow spectral bands, maybe about 10 nanometers wide. And they are, the idea of those is that because the signal coming off the ocean is a lot smaller than you get from some other sources, they tend to gather the radiance from a larger area. So these tend to have sort of much poorer spatial resolution. 250 meters up to 1 kilometer is kind of normal at the moment. These are the kind of images that you get from that. So at the kind of scale of New Zealand, they look pretty good, but when you zoom in, obviously you can't start to reach the limits of that kind of spatial resolution. But you can see from this image here, all the different kinds of color that we're getting around the ocean, around New Zealand. So we're getting we're looking, my interest is a lot in these kind of open ocean areas here where we're seeing mainly the signal from phytoplankton. These coastal areas where we're seeing a lot of land runoff, a lot of suspended sediment, and these darker areas where we're getting a lot of absorption from yellow substance, colored dissolved organic matter, tannins, humic acids, which are coming from vegetation breakdown coming down the rivers. As you know, because everyone here is a kind of remote sensor, we get a lot of interference from the atmosphere, or we get a lot of signal from the atmosphere. So for my colleagues who look at atmospheric properties, that's their signal. For me, it's kind of something that gets in the way. So we do atmospheric correction to try and take off that signal. And for ocean color, it becomes quite a critical issue because almost as much signal is coming from the atmosphere as is coming from the ocean. We are also using sensors which are tilted so that they kind of avoid this kind of effect, this kind of sun glint, which stops us seeing anything in the ocean. And here, this is a plot against wavelength, really looking at the top atmosphere signal that the sensor is receiving, and then the component which is coming from the atmosphere. So we're trying to retrieve quite a small signal from something that's got a lot of atmospheric components. What can we get out? What kind of information do we get out from the water? Well, if you take a sample of water and filter it, you find all kinds of things in it. This is a kind of diagram showing the kinds of things you get in the water on the spatial scale across the bottom. So there's the truly dissolved material, some of those humic and fulvic acids that I've talked about, and then getting up into the sort of you get colloids. Then you get into the particulates, the clays, going up to the silts and the sands. In terms of the living components, we've got the viruses, bacteria, then it goes on to the phytoplankton range. These are sort of microscopic algae, the photosynthetic component, and then the zooplankton, which are the sort of tiny animals that live in the ocean as well. Obviously, because you've got breaking waves on the surface of the water, you also get bubbles which come in as well. So that variation of material in the water gives you the kind of differences in color that, you know, we will all probably know. So the pure blue water, blue color of seawater, where there's very little particulate material in it, very little phytoplankton in it, or dissolved material in it, right up to the kind of estuaries with very high concentrations of phytoplankton or blooms offshore. And the phytoplankton is not one thing, so it's biological, so it's got variability in it. If you break down the different colored pigments that you get in phytoplankton, there's a whole range, and the phytoplankton are kind of changing this balance of pigments all the time to optimize their photosynthesis, which creates a challenge when you're trying to retrieve that absorption signature from the satellite data. Especially around river mouths, you get these very high concentrations of suspended sediment, which lead to this kind of brown, bright color. And this is the kind of, these are the tannins that we see a lot of. It's clear water, but it's got a very sort of strong absorption signature, especially in the blue. You also get situations like this, like Lake Tekbal, where you've got a lot of particulate material with very low absorption, and you get this very bright blue color from high scattering and little absorption. So what we're doing at NIWA operates a satellite receiver down in Lauder, so we receive a lot of this data from these ocean color satellites as they go over. That gets processed at NIWA, and then we generate from that a set of products. So we atmospherically correct that, we remap it, and then we apply algorithms to try and estimate the concentrations of some of those materials in the water. And then we create time composites of those. So a lot of the data that we've been working on so far, we've put onto an online portal. So if you do a search on NIWA-SCENES, which stands for Seas, Coasts, Estuaries, New Zealand, you'll get where we're up to with that process. And there's 10 products in there. They stretch back to 2002. They look at sea surface temperature, which is not a color product, of course, and then 8 ocean color products, breaking that material in the water down into the phytoplankton component and in the particulate component. Calibration is a significant issue with these ocean color satellites. So there's a degradation of the sensors over the course of the sort of 10 years of the mission. That degradation is particularly bad in the blue bands, can be 30% over that 10 years. And in order to get the information that we need, that has to be tracked within about 0.1%. Which is a real challenge for the Earth observation community around ocean color. This is a buoy which is operated by the US off Hawaii, which acts as the ground validation point for some of these ocean color sensors. They also have systems on board using lamps and viewing the diffusers and the moon for trying to track that degradation of the sensors as well, but it remains a difficult challenge. In terms of field measurements, we do a lot of measurements out from research ships. So we use radiometric sensors, measuring the incident light. We also have profilers, which measure the spectral shape of the underwater light field, different kinds of collectors, depending on what you're interested in. And we also have multispectral sensors looking at the surface of the water. So we take out the atmospheric correction problem and try and look at just the algorithm that estimates what's in the water. There's also a whole set of in-water instruments that we use. So these kind of typically measure the effect of the material in the water on a light beam. So looking at the attenuation of that, absorption, looking at scattering from that, looking at backscattering from that particularly. So turbidity sensors, for instance, are an example of a backscatter sensor. One of the issues, of course, is spatial resolution. So if we're looking at a small area like an estuary in New Zealand, the 500-meter resolution data doesn't really cut it. So that's why we're trying to look at blending that high resolution wide spectral band data with the fine spectral data and the high radiometric calibration data to try and get the best of both worlds. The technology is kind of improving in that area all the time, so these spatial resolutions are getting better and better. There's a particular issue near the land because the land acts as an infrared radiance source, which kind of messes up your atmospheric correction in a lot of areas. We're also working, looking at using drones for measuring watercolor. So this might be an alternative or in addition to doing aerial surveying of water quality, that a lot of regional councils are using at the moment to try and map change in their area. And some of the opportunities for using the drones are kind of interesting. So we've been looking at multi-rotor drones, such as this. Some of the hyperspectral sensors, you know, are $100,000. You have to be pretty brave flying those over coastal zones. So we're looking at using lower cost sensors, which can be attached onto drones, smaller, lower power sensors as well, but which can still give us the information that we need. One thing that we think is quite promising are these fixed wing drones. So fixed wing drones fly much faster. They can cover much bigger areas. They can be launched, as you can see, small ones by a person. Larger ones are launched from a kind of catapult system that's attached to a car often. And putting optical sensors on these kind of fixed wing drones can be a kind of pretty cost-effective way of covering quite a large area of sea. So, you know, in conclusion, that this ocean colour data is certainly used a lot through New Zealand at the moment. It's certainly an area of active research. The fact that the data is kind of free to users is obviously a great thing when we've got such a huge exclusive economic zone and few researchers or research ships working in that. Data quality remains an issue that we continue to work on, and especially validation of these kind of coastal products is still difficult. Spatial resolution is limiting, but hopefully is improving with technology. The data volumes are getting very large, so we're working on trying to make this data available to users through these online portals. And really, you know, my view is that this kind of sampling has to be integrated with in situ and other modeling work. So we kind of tying it to work that we're doing from buoys, for instance, and from things like gliders, and trying to link it into models of what else is happening in the water column. So biogeographical models of water constituents. Okay, so that's it. Thanks to my colleagues. This is one problem that you often get, these pesky seabirds. So thank you.